Back into the show. In this live stream, we have an extra special guest, Andreas Welsh, who is a VP at SAP, and he handles AI solutions for enterprise. So we're happy to have him on the show. Andreas, you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Perfect. First of all, thanks, Manny, for having me. I'm so excited to be on the show. Been watching many of your recent episodes. So glad to be able to make an appearance here too. Um, so I've been working in the AI space for about the last 6 years, roughly. I would say started when AI was this new thing, this hype, and we're working with customers and early adopters on what is AI, how can it help your business, what is already available so you can test the waters. And then within SAP, moved into a role where I was leading product management for AI, bringing more of these innovations into our core processes. Maybe for those of you that have not heard of SAP or are not that familiar with what SAP does, SAP is the world's leading business application software company. And many of the household names that we all know run their business on SAP, whether it's for things like planning, material management, employee engagement, basically any type of operation that a company would do. And so from there on, moved over into something we call solution management, where we help make it easier for our customers understand what's available, how can you consume it, and so on. So really excited about this space of AI and automation and what it brings in terms of value and opportunities and what we can do with this amazing technology, but not just for the sake of technology, but in the context of solving a big business problem.
Awesome. And I'll take a moment to ask people to drop in your comments, your questions. This is a live session, so that's the nice thing about these sort of things is you can participate as well. So feel free to do that. Andreas, I think of SAP, like I think of ERP and asset planning, and in my experience as going into enterprises and trying to develop machine learning solutions, analytic solutions, I always felt like that was the richest pool of data that I could start off with. There wasn't a lot of IoT data, there wasn't a lot of OT data, but when I looked at their ERP systems and their asset management systems, like there was a lot of data around the assets, around when they failed, their usage. And so I always felt like that was a good place to start. Have you found that, or have you seen something different?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, and it mirrors what I've seen as well and what we see, because when you look at data that is captured in an ERP system, a lot of it is transactional data. A lot of it is obviously structured data, so what this data looks like. It's text in tables, in fields, so it's rather clean and clear what the data
Yes.
is that you have that you can work with. Doesn't mean that it's always complete for what you want to do, or it's that clean, right? You might need to do some data prep and cleansing, these type of things. But it's typically a lot easier to work with than with unstructured data, where you have a PDF document or an Excel or an image, and you want to scrape some characters off of it and make sense of that. But there is a lot of opportunity, right? And we also see customers, moving into that IoT area and direction, where they do have sensors that send data that you then in the end again try to make sense of in your ERP system. For example, think of something like a cold chain from say vaccines, for example, from the time they are created, made, produced to the time they reach your doctor's office or the hospital. That cold chain needs to be secured, otherwise the vaccines go bad. So having sensors, for example, in the trucks that monitor the temperature, things like acceleration, these type of things, and feed that information back to ERP, then lets you analyze that data and say, hey, if the temperature in that cooling environment is out of tolerance by 2, 3, 4 degrees, whatever it may be that you define, then alert me. But alert me not only when I get the product and I see it's gone bad, but alert me as it is in transit, so that I can decide and work out with the manufacturer how I want to handle this. So I think there are a lot of opportunities there when we combine, again, physical with digital worlds.
Yes, yes, and I always I always felt like that was like the place where I went when I started POCs with enterprises, where like I went to the ERP data to look for clean structured transactional data, to your point, to at least show them something like, okay, here's the insights that you have in your data that you haven't been paying attention to. Can you talk a little bit about that, like as you work with companies and businesses and enterprises? What are some of your earlier steps? What are some of the things that you do early on in an engagement to help a company or nudge them in a more data driven type of direction, to show them, like maybe the insights that they're leaving on the table, so to speak, by not mining their data, or maybe you're showing them what's possible by showing them examples and POCs. What's some of those early things? What are some of those early things that you do in your engagements?
Sure. Yeah, I think it starts really with that business question of what is it that you're trying to achieve? And sometimes even answering that question is not as simple as it might sound. Because we see that a lot of times, right, the baseline you need to define your status quo, to define what's good and what's better, that's not always readily accessible or easily available, right? I think we have a problem here or there. So first of all, I would say define the metrics, identify the metrics that matter to you and that you want to improve. And then look at data, yes, but also make sure that the stakeholders involved in that project do have a different perspective on the same problem. So it's not just an IT problem, it's not just a manufacturing problem, but when you bring different stakeholders together, you get different kinds of experience and different flavors of things that you should consider. And I find that a lot of times that's already a huge step forward and a win in itself, raising that awareness, shaping that AI mindset in the organization that you work with. So that, over time, with the next project and the next project and the next project, they really get into this habit of how things can be done successfully and at scale.
Gotcha. So number one, identify your metrics, look at the business case, and say, hey, what are the numbers that we want to move up or move down? Try to identify a baseline of performance or metric. Like, we're gonna try to get 20% above this level. Sometimes that's hard to get, and then get the stakeholders together and help them develop an AI mindset, so that they kind of appreciate what they're doing. Are there certain attributes of that AI mindset? How would you define that? What's if you think in your mind like someone that really has a really good AI mindset, what kind of characteristics come to mind when you think of that person?
Sure. To me, that AI mindset means a few different things. One is general awareness of what is this thing AI. How can we use it? What are the opportunities? Because it's not all just dystopian. It's going to steal my job or your job, and this kind of thing. But really have at least a basic understanding of what it can do. It can give you recommendations. It can classify or categorize things. It can make proposals. These type of actions that you need in a business context and that can help that business user work more efficiently and more effectively. As you look at different roles that you have in your business and where it gets more technical, having a better understanding and a better grasp of concrete technologies, how would I actually do this and what do I need, then becomes important as well. But regardless of whether it's more a business type person or context, or more of a technologist, having this understanding that when we do work on AI, it starts with data as the first point and the first thing that we really need to get good outcomes is already an important learning too. But in that regard, right, I talked about that the other day on my channel, that not every business problem is an AI problem, and that's a big thing as well that you need to get across, or that you want to get across when you talk about this mindset. Because a lot of times it's so easy to jump to that conclusion. Yes, it's AI, will do it. It's innovative. It's great. We need to do it. Everybody else is doing it. Yes, but the problem you're trying to solve, can you solve it more quickly, more robustly, easier, simpler with the resources you have if you just apply some rules, for example?
Right.
And it fixes the same problem. So that's why I say start with the business problem first, and then determine how can we actually solve this.
100%, Andreas, and I think we were chatting about this on LinkedIn. But I came in as the AI machine learning expert, and for a lot of companies, they want to say they're implementing AI machine learning, and I would look at their problem and what they were trying to solve, and 50% of the time, it was just a digitization problem where like they had this problem in their workflow, and somebody was using paper and pen, and I just felt like, well, you don't need OCR or anything. You just need to move this to an application, and that's probably going to increase the overall value to the system. And that's like that doesn't require AI, but it's probably one of the first things that you should be doing.
Absolutely, I think you're spot on there, right? Think about all the paper-based processes that still exist in companies. Even in things like finance, for example, when your customer sends you something that's called a payment advice. Hey, next week I'm going to pay you $100,000 for these 5 invoices. Good luck figure out which ones I mean, and if there's any residual and so on. So you wonder, even from a vendor's perspective, hey, how come this is not fully digitized yet? We do have the means, but just the way business is being done and has been done for so long, that has not evolved to that level yet. But I see we have a few good questions in the chat already.
Yeah, let's go into one of these here. Which are the key factors to consider when you're designing services based on AI to improve the current business process, and how can we get sponsorship in the company with the chiefs or the executive leaders or the decision makers? I think it's a good question by Lewis. Thank you. You want to feel that one, Andres?
Sure, yeah. So Lewis and those watching, I think it really comes down to hard facts. Can you show that you have a problem, and what the implication or the impact of that problem is, where you're spending more time, where you are spending more of your resources or more of your money doing things that you really shouldn't be doing yourself or should have people do, but things that could be automated. So things like a process intelligence, process discovery and analysis, this whole step or type of technology, if you will, I would see that in many cases as a precursor to even kicking off an AI project. Because it sounds cliche, but you can't really optimize what you don't know. And if you don't know the facts, if it's a gut feeling, yes, you might be onto something, but it's easier to show, hey, we're spending X amount of days, resources, money on doing this activity where we believe we can automate it, and maybe even automate it with AI.
Yeah, that's a great response, Andreas. I would definitely echo that. I would also say I like your point about starting with the business metric and the business problem, and then thinking about your toolbox, right? Like, what do I have? Do I have machine learning? I have rules. I have automation. I have digitization. Okay, let's solve this problem, and maybe 50% of the solution is going to be AI. But there's just like really good low hanging fruit that we can pick up by using rules and analytics, and sometimes data aggregation. I feel like is just so highly valued. I come into a shop and they're like, "Oh, we want to get all these insights," and like, well, you just needed these statistics, these roll ups on these past 2 years on a monthly basis in this nice, really cool chart, and people are like, oh my gosh, like, yes, that's great, that's exactly what we need right now.
Yeah, and it's sometimes as simple as that, right?
So yeah, I think that's a really good point. They're starting with the business problem and the metrics. Andres, you talked about an AI mindset, and I feel like that's becoming mandatory for individuals and organizations moving forward. Like I think 5 years ago, like maybe like not so much. It was kind of cool, like if you're a senior leader, you're familiar with AI, machine learning, and data, that's a bonus. But today, it's almost like required because of how many industries and businesses are going to be impacted, disrupted, and enhanced by AI and machine learning. I'm wondering if you're seeing that as well, or if you would disagree with that.
Yeah, I think it's certainly evolved. When I think back to 2016, 17, and being more in these business development type roles, helping educate customers in a sense, or enable them on what is machine learning and what is AI, that conversation has evolved dramatically, and in a way that is positive, because the questions we get now is, well, great, you tell me you have this AI in your product, or you tell me I should use AI somewhere in my process, but what is the concrete benefit that I can expect if I do this? So really, this point around AI literacy is taking shape, and is sharpened even more. And I believe it's certainly no longer sufficient to just read HBR articles or browse Forbes.com on what these buzzwords mean, but really to be and become more data literate, to become more AI literate. And I think that the best way to do this is by doing these experiments, doing these projects, early projects, and learning and building that learning culture also in your organization.
And who's spearheading that, Andreas? In your view, is it a chief technical officer? Is it a chief digital officer? Is it business unit leaders? Like, who is the person that really has to make sure they have that AI mindset and is being a leader and an advocate, and is both helping the company think about how to use AI and how not to use AI? Like, is there a person that comes to mind?
I think it actually applies to any business function, right? Even if you're the CHR or the CFO, you want to ensure that people in your organization also have a sense of understanding of what is AI, what is automation. Not so much, again, because of the technology or for technology's sake, but rather if you're close to that business process, and you're doing these steps day in, day out, you know that process in and out too, like the back of your hand, and you know where it breaks, you know where it's tedious, you know where you're missing things, or where you have to do things 3 or 4 times, and do it in multiple systems. These kinds of insights. So empowering these business analysts, business users, to at least identify these opportunities and surface them, I think is key, and that applies to all different domains. What I see is, when you then talk more about technology, and whether it's which one to use, or particularly which vendor to use, then it becomes much more of an IT technology type conversation, when it's about governance, about standardization, about best practices that you want to establish. But it's definitely something that happens hand in hand. And where it doesn't, I can only recommend to evolve it to that stage.
Right. And you talked about the way to learn about AI literacy is actually to start doing it, to start running pilots and projects and experiments. What's the guidance there? Like, what's the ideal way to do that? Or what's the some of the what are some good experiences that companies have had running experiments? How does someone that's leading those types of effort make it an enjoyable and an insightful experience for the companies? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, something that we've seen in our own transformation or evolution is to do it with a community of people. Certainly, it depends on the type of company, culture, and even the size. But if you're a mid-sized, large, and enterprise type company, forming this community around this topic can help create a different dynamic and a positive dynamic around this topic of AI and learning. And what have you seen? Maybe some people have dabbled in it already, and they can share, hey, I've tried this out. I know this didn't really work well, but if you change certain things, we've seen better outcomes. So this culture of community, of exchange, of networking, especially something that we found in our environment to be very positive, and to create and stimulate a lot more ideas and thoughts on that topic. I would say if you're a smaller company, if you have somebody on your team that has worked in BI or analytics, it's a great stepping stone as well to evolve your career, to look into this new area. You already know data cleansing, data wrangling, all the prerequisites to get to a good result for analytics and BI. So that the next step is becoming a lot easier. And the other thing is you don't have to be a data scientist anymore to do AI or to use AI. So looking at the products you already use in your environment and go through a feature list, what is already there that you might not be using today might deliver excellent results as well without having to invest in a huge project, in bringing on new resources or upskilling people to that level. So look at what's already in the products you use and what benefits that can bring you.
100%. I think that's so important. I've talked about this in previous streams around upskilling individuals that are already in the business and augmenting their skill set with AI, machine learning, analytics type of capabilities. And I like that from a couple of reasons. One is, a big part of what what a big part of what makes AI and machine learning successful is domain expertise, and no one's going to have that more than an analyst or an engineer or a process control person that's on the floor, and they're going to have loads of that, and then you can teach them how to work in Python or R or Tableau. Okay, that's like an online course, that's not a problem, and that's great. And then I also like it from the fact that it's really hard to go out into the marketplace for most companies and get that type of talent and bring them into I say like a non-tech, a non-software type of organization. So if you're training these people, you're getting the best of both of those worlds. Like you get solid domain expertise, but then also you are getting talent perhaps at a discount, and also you're helping your employee level up their skill sets as well. So everybody wins.
Absolutely, yeah. And I like that example that you mentioned about a control technician or somebody on the shop floor. Actually, a couple of years ago, I visited one of our customers in the US, a large retailer, and together with our CTO, we did some research and some user interviews, if you will. So we visited distribution centers, we visited the retail store, we visited corporate office, and talked to different people, and just getting a more complete picture of what a day in that business looks like, even from some perspectives, has already been so valuable to see, how for me personally, first of all, what does the distribution center even look like from the inside? And you have all these belts, and you have the packages that come and that get scanned. Do you do it with labels? Do you do it with RFIDs? Why do you do it with one over the other? These type of things, picking, packing, what can you optimize? How do you stack the boxes in your trailer so that you don't have a lot of wasted space? All these things that you're probably not necessarily exposed to if you think so, well, where could I use AI? Right? That's not how those ideas are typically conceived. So to your point, that business knowledge, or if you don't have it yourself, talk to the people that are on the ground, that do run that process day in, day out. How they do it, what frustrates them, what could be done better. And that's where I think you get a lot of valuable ideas in your own business already.
Great advice. Some of my best data scientists were also really good at talking with engineers, quality control analysts, people on the ground floor, and understanding the process, and had almost like a user centric approach to data science. I just found that the folks that didn't want to do that miss obvious things in their modeling and in their solution building. So we like as I was managing these projects, I would, we would check in with the subject matter experts, and the folks that didn't do that well, they would present a solution, and the engineer that had spent all their time, say like in manufacturing, they would say like, that's obviously not correct, like that's like, or like that's like, obviously, yeah, that's the case, we already doing that very simply. And they would completely miss the aim. But the data scientists that spent the time understanding the entire process, talking to the individuals and appreciating all the nuances, they were able to come up with the interesting solutions where the subject matter experts were saying like, yes, oh, that's exactly it, that would make my life 100% easier. And what's neat about that is, if you're able to convince those subject matter experts, those engineers, they're going to talk to their managers, and then their managers are going to help you craft the business case, and then those managers are going to be able to sell that to the executive group, and then you're ultimately going to get the project funded. But it's really important to get the buy-in from those frontline people. It's so critical, but it's also a hard thing to do. It's a skill that I think a lot of data scientists lack.
Yeah, and building on that, if you like to learn, and if you also set that collaboration model up accordingly, you can almost think about it as a greenhouse. You run your project in a defined scope. You get business and analysts and experts in. You have your data scientists, but they both learn and grow together as part of this project, because the business person will pick up some skills around data science. How do I ask questions when I talk to my stakeholders, when I need to acquire information? And at the same time, your data scientists will learn about a concrete business problem and get to see how they make an impact if their model goes to production.
I really like that framing, Andreas, because I oftentimes felt, as a former data scientist myself and trying to do this, I would oftentimes feel like certain engineers were annoyed that I was taking time away from their day job. So like, hey, will you spend six hours telling me about your entire process, from a naive person that has zero understanding of it? Like, tell me about semiconductor manufacturing. What's the chemistry? How do you do that? What's and they're like, oh my gosh, like this is like bad for me. But if you frame it the way that you're frame it, that's really compelling. I can say like, hey, I'm going to teach you about AI, analytics, machine learning, how you can do more with this data, how to make your life easier. And you're going to teach me about semiconductor manufacturing. And that's the fair trade. I think that makes that much more palatable. That's really good.
Yeah, that can be a nice win-win.
Yes. Yes. You talked about building a community within organizations. Who are some of the personas, some of the titles, some of the people that you want involved in that community as you're trying to build that out?
So for us, as a software company, and doing that in one of our largest engineering units, that was product managers, product owners, data scientists, engineers, but coming out of the different domains for asset management, for supply chain, for finance, and to engage in this community, share. We've seen this or that work on a use case, working with PDF documents, where we work with customers, and it's taking us this or that long, and these were some of the hurdles we had to overcome. Or for this or that reason, this project has not progressed further than a prototype at this point in time. And somebody else says, well, have you tried this or that, or we've run into a similar issue, maybe go talk to Joe in this or that department. So this dialogue, this networking is really key. I think for business outside of high tech or outside of software, it would be different members of a department. doesn't necessarily have to be the head of the department. I think somewhere where somebody goes through that process on a day-to-day basis is already a good candidate. And if somebody has an affinity for data, for analytics, if they are maybe someone that creates the reports and pulls the data from systems, and if they have an interest in this topic most of all, then you find already the right mindset to evolve into an AI mindset.
How do you think about the mechanism? Is it that these like you have some sort of group? Are they just on a LinkedIn? Excuse me. Are they like in an internal group within the company's intranet, or is it an email distribution thing, or is it a weekly meeting, monthly meeting kind of thing? What are some of the details and the mechanics that go into building that community?
First of all, it needs some structure, and to foster that engagement. In our case, we've used different types of media. We do have a regular newsletter that comes out about once a month. Talks about some of the highlights that we call them AI ambassadors should be aware of. Then it's also a matter of pairing them up with technology teams or with somebody that is familiar or more familiar with using certain technologies, and bring those technology experts in for a webinar type session or a meeting, and present what is new, what can you use with this technology. So if you see something in your business area or in your business process, here are some examples how you can solve this.
Yeah. That's good. That's good advice. Is having that common distribution. I like the AI ambassador things because you always need people to be spearheading these things. In I was at a financial services company, a fairly large one, and we were trying to get data science off the ground. And what we did is we put together an affinity group that got together every 2 weeks to talk about just data science, machine learning within the context of the business. We had the company sponsor lunch for us, and we had our managers got bought in, but I really enjoyed that because I got to connect with other like-minded individuals in other parts of the organization, and we were all learning together. We were sharing best practices, and we were kind of building kind of like a small growing coalition around making the organization more data driven, more machine learning, and we could pool our influence together to make things happen. So, for example, our studio, which is open source, IT had a block on that, and so one of us could complain about it, but we couldn't do anything about it. But all of us complaining about it, like all of a sudden, like IT's got a budget and make our studio available for us.
Right. And I think it's also reassuring in a sense to see that others are likely struggling with the same problems that you are struggling. Data, getting access to data, clean data, skill set to that point. And somebody's probably figured out something already that you just don't know of yet. So by having this dialogue and also sometimes we just have calls that are not necessarily moderated or where we don't have a fixed agenda, but if somebody wants to present something that they have been working on or where they have made progress, that then again stimulates that discussion.
Yeah, totally. Andreas, can you talk a little bit about where companies are getting stuck with AI innovation, AI projects? Like as you look back on some of your projects and the companies that you've worked with, like say like the last 10 or something, and if you're looking at the ones where you didn't really get the best outcome you wanted, what's the root cause there? What are some of the things that are happening that are keeping companies from moving forward with this capability?
That's a really good question. I would say a lot of times it does come down to data and to process. Now, every business is unique, and as much as we try to standardize processes, and as much as they're being commoditized, there's always some nuance how business A does it over business B or C. So depending upon that nuance, you might have data, or you might be missing some data that is critical to build a complete feature set. So on that data front, how standardized is your process? How easily can I take what I've done here, cookie cutter, and replicate that? I think that's one thing. On the other hand, for customers, or companies, there's no need to do everything as a one-off. So to that point again, take a look at what's already there, what you can use, and then compare, does it work with the data I have? Does it work with the products and the processes I have? Would be my recommendation as a first step to mitigate spending time on a lot of analysis and coming out at the end with, well, that's probably not going to work here.
So lack of data, that's a big problem. I see that all the time too. I feel like 50% of my projects get killed because we don't have data.
Right, and you don't find that out in the first meeting. So it takes some time until you get to that point. I would say with unstructured data, there's also always the challenge. How do you get access to that data? Do you have sufficient ground truth to know, in a CSV file or Excel file, these are the values that are correct, that map to this PDF, so that if I train my model using this ground truth, I can evaluate the performance. Where you work with unstructured data, is it complete? What results do you get? How do you augment that data set? How do you add new data? How do you train, retrain, push out these models on this operational AI ops, ML ops type site? And I think that's another area as well where I would recommend taking a good look at that, and also looking at how you run this or want to run this in your company. So establishing that process in a sense too.
Right. And with data is tricky because it's sort of a chicken and the egg kind of thing, because companies want to do AI but don't have data. But then when I ask them to invest in data infrastructure and collection, they say, well, we don't see the value in collecting this data. Well, that's because you need the data to generate the insights, but you don't have that because you don't have the data yet. So how, have you seen that as well? What's what's worked in helping companies appreciate that, like, in 5 years their data is probably going to be one of the most valuable assets they have on their balance sheet, and you're right now you're not managing that correctly. You're probably letting a lot of that fall through the cracks, so you have to capture it, but it's going to take some upfront investment for you to do that and see the value later on. Have you seen that? What's kind of, how do you tackle that persuasion problem?
I think a lot of times it's also the realization, well, we might not have enough data yet. So think of something like a cold start problem where you need a certain amount of data to train your model in the first place. But it's, hey, let's wait a quarter, maybe two, to accumulate the data and have that data generated as a result of business transactions. And then we revisit that again, and run that proof of concept or run that prototype and pilot again to see what results we can get. But it is an investment. It does take some time, but if you always push it off, we'll do that next year or in 3 years or when we have time, chances are it's not going to happen. So you're missing out on that opportunity while you are sitting on that gold mine of data.
Right. And I feel like you open yourself to the possibility of being disrupted by someone coming in with to your marketplace with a service that's leveraging AI and data. And now you want to respond to that, and you want to do that in the next couple of quarters, but you find that you can't do that because it requires like more data than you've captured up until that point.
Yeah, that's right. I think Luis asked another question in the chat, I see.
Yeah, let's bring it up. All right, some advice for how you can train your model in the beginning of a project with few data sources. So I think we just touched on that a little bit, but feel free to jump on that. I'll add some comments too.
Sure. It's a challenge. It's something I believe you need to look at individually. One advice could be look for something where you can use pre-trained models, if that is something that is available, and see how good results you get with that. If it's really a custom project, spend some time accumulating that data, or as another option, educate users that you are working on this project, you're accumulating data. So if they see something that either is not right, we're using that to tweak this model over time, or better yet, just overall educate them. Hey, we're working on this project right now. The data you create helps to feed it into that model in a quarter's time. So I think being realistic and managing those expectations is important. And the other part is, once you do put it in production, this whole change management around it, and ideally you start that as you start the project, thinking about change management. That is making your users aware that here is some help, some machine learning, AI, some intelligence running in the background, but it's not perfect. It's not perfect. Like, you are not perfect, right? You're not 100% accurate all the time, but it helps you do some things more easily, more quickly. Sometimes it might be off, and that is okay. We're all sometimes off. But most of the time, it helps you boost your productivity and increase your efficiency. So managing that expectation, I think, is key. And having feedback loops in something like a hypercare phase when you introduce that new capability, to say, hey, what do you see works really well? What do we need to tweak? And have that closer contact and engagement with those that use it.
Andreas, you said that sometimes some of us are off. I feel like that's the base case for me. I'm oftentimes off. That's, at least that's my wife would tell you.
That's what makes us human, right?
Right. Yeah. I know, right? Like, yeah, like, hey, you're not going to be 100% all the time. Why should you expect like an algorithm? I guess that's the benefit of an algorithm and why you offload it. But right. At least at the start, like, maybe not so much high pressure or aim. I would also, I think those are all great thoughts. I would also add that there are, this is why I like Andreas's point of starting with the business problem first, and then thinking about the array of options that you have to solve that problem. So I oftentimes would see data scientists come into a problem and off the bat try to do deep learning, supervised learning approaches. And those are great approaches and they're very effective, but they require a ton of data. And you need labels. You need a ton of labels for supervised learning. You need the outputs and the inputs, and you need to map that over a long period of time. You need it over different paradigms. You need it over different operational modes. That is really expensive to collect from a data perspective. So what can you do if you can't do that? Well, maybe you might do anomaly detection. That you don't need a ton of labels for that. You can just plot the overall history of the time series, and then when it goes here, that's an alert. Well, it's not going to give you a prediction, but maybe you can send that over to an analyst to look at and start getting some insights there. Or you don't have enough data to do anomaly detection. Okay, maybe you can do rules-based. So just, these 4 things, when this triggers and this triggers and this triggers, then do this. That's a good place to start too, to start helping your organization think about the data and the organization. So I would say, Lewis, to kind of think about the level of complexity that you need and what's going to give you the most bang for your buck in terms of addressing the business problem. So that's why I really like Andreas's point there. Like, start there and then go into your toolbox of options and say, hey, how can we add value? Because you're early on in the process and you're trying to convince this organization or this company or this team to be more AI mindset friendly and to be more data driven. You want to kind of like ease into that, I would say.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have some other questions here. All right, let's ask another question here from Michael. When is a proper time to introduce corporate privacy policies to AI training? Oh, that's a good one, Michael. You're stumping us, man. That's a 201 level type of question, but I like it. Any thoughts there, Andreas?
Two thoughts. One is, at the very beginning of the project before you even started, setting that baseline. And the second one is always, so continuously look at it, review it as you review your results. I think if you own the data in your business, it's probably a little easier than if you're a software vendor and you build this for hundreds and thousands of customers. But nonetheless, data privacy, data protection are very important. And looking at our friends in the European Union with the General Data Protection Regulation, there's a lot of information, a lot of requirements there that benefit individuals, that benefit society, and you want to make sure that you incorporate that early on, and that you think about it continuously. Same with topics around ethics or responsible AI, that it's not an afterthought. Once we're done building small and we put it in production, well, does it hurt or help? No, you should really do that at the very beginning. And I believe it's an investment that allows you to scale with each and every product or project, and apply this learning and these standards to everything that you do. So you invest and you continuously monitor.
100%. And Michael, what I would say as a former data scientist, start me off with secured private snippets of the data. Like, don't even give me the option of looking at what might be sensitive data. And you can do that if you have a data management platform that allows you to be very specific about controls, to be very specific around access, who has access to certain things. So I would expect your data professionals to be able to turn that off for me as a data scientist, so that I only start with data that is already pre-approved for me to look at. And then of course, if I'm doing additional things to it, if I'm combining it with other things and it's going downstream, I have to think about that. But I would say, like, as a data scientist, like, I want to be making sure that I'm starting off with data that I'm supposed to be looking at, that is controlled, that I can actually do some work with. Okay. Great questions. Keep them coming. Yeah. I mean, this is, again, the benefit of going live is that we get to field your questions in real time. So great questions. Keep them coming. The harder, the better, I would say. Very neat. I think you talked about, so we talked about lack of data. How do we get companies to invest in data infrastructure? You also talked about another key pain point that I'm seeing out there too, Andreas, which is customization. So this notion that you have to go in and solve a similar type of problem many times, which isn't all that scalable. It's like it's a many to many type of problem, whereas for scalability you want a one to many. And I find that also being somewhat painful for companies in terms of getting a real good return on their investment on AI, is scaling out their data science resources and their people, and getting enough alpha off of those to make up for the spend. What are companies doing in that respect that makes that a little bit more palatable? Any ideas that come to mind in terms of how to improve on that problem?
One of the things I would recommend, what I also see in the market, is look also for reusable technology components. So many times, I'm in customer conversations and my peers as well, and we see that company XYZ is assigning their data science resources to do named entity recognition and extraction. Well, there are models and services already built and commercially available, and maybe some open sources as well that you can use. So you don't need to focus on this part. So a lot of it, I believe, has also, again, to do with data scientists' awareness of what else is there, is out there. Not everything needs to start on a blank sheet of paper. So that would be my recommendation: to look at what others are already doing. Another classic case we see is when we talk to key organizations. Hey, I want to categorize incoming tickets and assign it to the right category or to the right agent. and maybe propose some recommended solutions based on what agents have historically replied. There's no need to do that from scratch. Companies and software vendors are doing it. SAP, for example. So again, spend your resources, invest your resources in areas that are truly differentiating. And coming back to the point, look at what's already commercially available or available as open source that helps you jumpstart your project.
100%. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think a good product owner or project manager can help you do that. As a former data scientist, I'll tell you that I always wanted to build it myself because I wanted to learn.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, no, you don't have to go out and get it. I can do an NLP pod. Like I can fork it, I can work on it. So if you leave it to the technical people, you may have to do a lot of DIY. But yeah, if you're a product manager, definitely always think about how you can reuse services, and especially if you're in the prototyping phase, because what you're after is you're after result. So if you're able to get that name recognition fast and it's cost you less time and it's a API service or whatever, you know, people, your managers and your executives are not going to care. They're just going to care that you were able to implement this new technology and it's up and running and it's seamlessly working.
It also comes back to, is it truly differentiating for your business or for the problem you're solving, or is that in a sense repeatable, reusable, almost commoditized and non-differentiating in that sense, so you don't have to go in and build it. And also in terms of accuracy, for example, does a 2% improvement between taking something off the shelf and something that you build justify the investment that you're making? Or is it fair to say, let's take this, yeah, it works, we can progress in our project much more quickly because we take these repeatable things and reusable things, and then again invest time and resources where it is differentiating.
Solid point. I think you're right. You do have to differentiate between whether or not the function is core to your business or not. Like if it's like accounting, HR, like those are all kind of standard services that every business has to deal with. But if it's your core competency involved, then I think I would make the case for it being a little bit more DIY, because you're probably going to know that better than anybody else, and you're not going to find the level of performance that you need out there. And it may also be a new revenue source for you, or it may be a new competitive asset for you as a company to invest in that. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind is I wonder, it's been a few months since I've seen the new job profiles that Gartner has put out there with AI or machine learning engineers and data scientists, data engineers, these type of roles. I believe once we see more of these roles and official job profiles and job titles in companies, that separation of what is the job of a data scientist, what is the job of an ML engineer, then also becomes clearer. And maybe it's not necessarily just the data scientist that needs to know all of this, but it's a matter of translating between business requirements, looking at what is already out there that we can use, and what do we really need to build something custom for.
Yeah. We also, Andreas, we talked about this concept of, you focus on the business problem first, the metrics, and then you go to your toolbox of solutions, AI being one of them. But the other ones that I get a little bit confused by as well is RPA and automation. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about A, how do you see RPA? How would you define that? And then B, how does it contrast with AI? And maybe C, when would you use one over the other? Sorry to give you all three in the one slice, but
all good. Let's see if I can put them in one answer. So yes, different technologies are used and should be used for different purposes. With AI, It's about identifying patterns in large amounts of, or from large amounts of data that you have, and give a prediction or give a result to a user, or as a next step in the process. It can be unstructured data, like you said, financial data. It can also be extracting information from documents and from unstructured data. That's where it's really good at. But when you, so on a very specific, narrow, and well-defined task, if you look at what happens in a business process, for example, an analyst in finance needs to log into a vendor invoice portal, download the invoice, save it on their desktop, copy and paste data into an ERP system, for example, or some kind of screen, and then maybe add some information and click submit, so that moves on to the next step. There's a very well-defined case for using AI, which would be to extract that information from that PDF and then to put it into your ERP system, or to pre-fill your mask. But you would still need that person to log into the website, download the PDF, save it, and then upload it such that ML or AI can run. And that's where something like robotic process automation comes in. Like the term says, it's robotic, so it's also repeatable in that sense, for really those tasks and actions that you do on a regular basis, that are not value adding, but you still need to do them. And in many cases, that also means integration, right? How do I integrate this vendor portal with my backend system? And one way can be through either click-based automation or through API-based automation. I take something from here and I put it there. So in combination, you can take care of these repeatable, mundane steps where somebody really needs to click and download something, and extract information, make sense of that data by using AI. So it's really that combination and working in concert. That's the value.
Yeah, I would imagine that there is a lot of value from them working together. So like a lot of RPA systems in place to do all the steps to collect data and to do all the different things you have to do. But then maybe you call an API that's leveraging a machine learning model to get back into the RPA business workflow and continue doing its thing and adding value to the end user.
Correct. And the beautiful thing is that over the last 4 or 5 years, it's gotten a lot easier to do both. And again, you don't need to be a data scientist to use that API that extracts that data from your PDF.
Right.
If you're a developer, if you're an RPA bot developer, you can call it, and you know how to call an API. You call that API for extracting information from documents, just like you would call any other API in your applications too.
Spot on. Yes, the where auto ML is now, like if you need to extract objects from an image, you it's an API call away and it comes back. You get all the meta information and you're integrating into your system. That's a really good call out.
Perfect.
Awesome. We are at the top of our hour. Time just flew talking about all this awesome stuff, Andreas. Anything else that you want to talk about? Anything? Any closing remarks? Anything you want to mention?
So look, I think there's a lot of opportunity in the field of AI in the enterprise, in business processes, has evolved and so much over those last 5-6 years. Having been part of a good chunk of that time and having worked with so many customers, I see how this hype really translates into outcome, and I believe we're on an exceptionally exciting trajectory to see even more of that innovation as more people learn about AI, as you get more familiar. If you're doing your own projects, your experiments, as more of us like here talk about it in the community, and we share these best practices and what we've seen work and maybe not work so well, so that we all can learn together. That's the part that really excites me, because there is a lot of opportunity. We just need to capitalize on it, and we just need to uncover it and make it happen.
Same here. I echo that as well. I think we had a period of hype, and that happens with any new technology, right? But
Yeah,
now we're in the period where you can actually make meaningful impact for your organization using some of this technology. The cost has come down. The expertise is more readily available, and I think it's getting to the point where it's not going to be optional. Like your company is either going to be a data-driven AI powered, machine learning powered organization, or they're going to get disrupted or they're no longer going to be around. So right now, I think maybe still kind of an optional kind of like type of investment. But pretty soon it's going to be like you're either data driven or you're not, and that's just going to be the binary situation.
absolutely. And that's why it's key to find the right opportunities and have a process for it when and which ones you pursue. And I think you're then on an excellent trajectory to position yourself to be the disruptor and not be disrupted.
Yeah, great opportunity for executives, senior leaders, people moving up to take this and like really be the advocate within their organization. A lot of opportunity there. Andreas, thank you so much for chatting today. Where can people find you? What's the best way for people to follow you? I already mentioned that you have one of the best LinkedIn content
Oh,
feeds out there with AI and RPA. So definitely, I know we can follow you on LinkedIn. Anywhere else that people can check you out?
so for now, LinkedIn is really the best place to be. I run something that I call a passion project, and I call it the intelligence briefing. So check that out on LinkedIn, because I want to help aspiring AI program leads find the best practices, set their programs up for success and for scale. And that's again why I'm really excited that we can have conversations like this in a virtual format and share what we see, but also get questions from the audience on these topics. So follow the intelligence briefing and me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Andreas. Thanks for coming on the show. And thanks for all your great insights and content on LinkedIn. And I'm sure we'll be chatting again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me. Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye bye.